The original sin of cost in America in the last 8 years, it goes to Joe Biden, who took inflation up 21%.
President Trump has been in office for 2
while he was
years.
president.
Hold on, Senator.
President
Trump's
let me
been in
finish.
office for 2 years.
President, let me finish. Let me finish.
So that was Tim Scott, the National Republican Senatorial Committee chairman, talking about the future and what he thinks we're going to see in November. Now we're going to take a look at more of this clip, but what's interesting here is you see that Tim Scott, they're on their heels. Republicans are on their heels right now when it comes to this midterm election. They know that they're going to have to run on President Trump's record. And President Trump's record right now is not good. And people are out there saying, look, we're still struggling. The cost of items is still high. Gas prices are high. We're at a war in Iran. All of this stuff that's going on right now. And then we just heard latest news that we're going to be getting beef that's imported to us for the next 90 days in an attempt to bring down the price of meat for consumers. And so that's another thing, because now you have ranchers that are very upset with this whole situation. And remember, one of the promises that President Trump made was that we're going to be focused on companies in America. American companies. But if we're temporarily importing beef into the U.S. and it's tariff-free and they're going to drop the price by 25%, that is going to impact these U.S. companies, these U.S. ranchers that are also trying to sell their beef. So let's go ahead and hear a little bit more of what Tim Scott has to say, and then we're going to take a look at the actual numbers when it comes to inflation. Here we go.
But I'm talking about costs, Senator. I'm talking about costs, and American families are also paying more in the wake of President Trump's taxes and tariffs. In fact, Senator Susan Collins of Maine said this: if the administration proceeds with these tariffs, they will increase costs for Maine families, as most businesses will have no choice but to pass on the tariffs to their customers through higher prices. Is she right, particularly given that we have seen that in the past, given the president's tariffs?
Well, Kristen, you're talking about a really important issue of costs. Let's look back at the original sin of cost in America in the last 8 years. It goes to Joe Biden, who took inflation up 21%.
President Trump has been in office for 2 years.
While he was president.
Hold on, Senator. President Trump's been in office for 2 years.
President, let me finish. President Trump has brought inflation from a sky-high 21% over the Biden years down to under 5%, and right now hovering near 4%.
Wait, inflation was at 3% when President Biden left office. It's at 3.4% right now. And the average household has paid $1,000 more in 2025 due to the tariffs, Senator.
Let's not forget the truth. The truth tells a great story. On the first piece of legislation in 2021, the Inflation Reduction Act that we should all laugh at took inflation to 9% in July of 2021. Cumulate the weight of inflation at the end of the Biden years, over $1,100 of lost spending power. President Trump inherited a weak economy and has built a resilient, strong economy with our wages going up and our costs flattening. Finally, every single Democrat in the Senate voted, this is really important, Kristen, voted to take money out of the pockets of senior citizens last year, voted to stop helping people working overtime by letting them keep more of their money, voted to take money, not out of the rich people, but out of the working class waitresses.
But hold on,
just last year, Kristen.
Senator, these are the facts. When President Trump took office, inflation was at 3%. It's now at 3.4%. Gas prices are over $4 a gallon, up over $1 from a year ago. President Trump's tariffs have cost American households nearly $2,000. He promised he was going to bring prices down on day one. Did he break that promise? Prices have gone up.
Well, good news is you don't disagree with the fact that Joe Biden brought 21% extra cost on the American families. We do agree.
We're not talking about Joe Biden, though. The Biden administration is over. This is the Trump. We're 2 years into the Trump administration.
It's a contrast, Kristen.
And so what do you guys think about that exchange? And you see that right now, Republicans, I guess the playbook is to go back to Biden. Everything is Biden's fault, and we're just trying to fix what Biden couldn't fix. But the problem with that is that you had a President Trump, during the campaign that was saying that he was going to change all of these things, and he was going to change them fast. That is the problem. Because when you make a promise that you're bringing down grocery prices and grocery prices don't come down, that's a problem. When you say you're bringing down gas prices don't go down. That's a problem. When you make a promise and say that we're not going to be involved in any foreign wars, that's a problem if we're currently in a war in Iran. When you make a promise and say that all you need to do is make a phone call and this war in Ukraine will be over and it's still going on, that's a problem. And that is what the voter is feeling right now. They're feeling like they were promised a lot of things and these things are just not happening. And that is why we're seeing this push. When you look at especially when you're looking at the Senate, you see that a lot of these states like Texas, like Iowa, like Ohio, these states that were leaning for Republicans, they're now toss-ups. And some of them are even leaning for Democrats if you look at North Carolina. And so this playbook is just not going to work. Now let's take a look. I want to take a look at what he was talking about. He was talking about inflation. And what's unfortunate when it comes to what we're allowing politicians to do is we're allowing them to just not tell the truth. And people just don't follow up on them. I'm glad that the host at least pushed back and said, look, this is not what's going on, but we have the numbers here. We have the information. Now, the 21% that he was talking about, I don't know if he was, counting months together and getting that 21%, but we never saw 21% inflation during Biden. But we did see 9.1% during Biden. That was the highest point. That was in June. It wasn't in July. It was in June of 2022. Now, a lot of people will say, and economists, experts will say, that this was as a result of COVID, which makes sense because all over the world we saw inflation. But if you just want to say, okay, it was Biden's fault, and if it's Biden's fault, what did Biden do in order to raise inflation that high? You'd have to explain that. But he did talk about in the video segment that the Inflation Reduction Act was implemented first, and then we saw inflation. That's not true. The Inflation Reduction Act was in August of 2022. We saw the highest inflation during the Biden administration in June of 2022. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And so from that 9.1%, we saw inflation start to drop. Okay, so and then in 2023, we saw it drop down to around 3%. Then it went up a little bit, came back down. And then we saw inflation hovering around between 4% and 3%. It continued into 2024, July of 2024. And so then when we got to 2025, we look at January of 2025, we saw inflation here at 3%. Okay, so it was already low. Before President Trump came into office, it was at around 3%. It even dipped below 3% and then came back up. And then this is what happened. President Trump comes into office, it goes down. In April, it was at like 2.3 or 2.4%. So it dropped down. It was going in the right direction. And then we started talking about tariffs, and that's when we saw inflation start to rise. Then, of course, in October, we didn't get that information because of the government shutdown. We came back. I believe it was at like 2.7%. It dropped back down a little bit, and then now it started to go back up. And that's what we saw. And so it was over 4% here, and then we saw it drop. I believe this was June and July, but it's still at 3.4%. That's what we're currently looking at, 3.4%. And so she is right. When President Trump came into office, it was at 3%. Now it's at 3.4%, and that's coming down from, it was at 4.5% the month prior to that. And so inflation, we haven't seen inflation go down continuously and stay down. It's gone down, it came back up. I mean, if we were looking at a situation where it was April of 2025, then yes, the president could say, I brought inflation down. When I came into office, it was at 3%. Now it's at 2.4% or 2.3%. That would be an accomplishment. But that's not what happened. Inflation went down, then came back up. And so whatever they're doing, the policies are just not working because inflation went back up. And so as we move into this midterm election, the president doesn't have anything that he can really say, look at the accomplishments that I've made. Because you can say all you want about these tax deductions that were given to, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, all that. A lot of people thought that that was going to be more than what it was. And then they realized, okay, when you're talking about no tax on overtime, it's the half of the overtime. It's not even the full overtime. Or you're talking about the no tax on tips. It doesn't benefit people that much. It doesn't benefit them as much as it was, promised. And when people look at their overall spending, they're realizing they're paying more now than they were paying a couple of years ago. And I think the host said it was like $2,000. I don't know where she got that information, but people are paying more. And they're letting the current administration know that they're paying more, but the current administration is not addressing it. And what we're seeing is like this chairman, Tim Scott, going back to Biden and say, well, it's Biden's fault. It's Biden's fault. You had time to change things. People waited, and now they're angry because things haven't changed. And if you continue to go back to Biden, you're going to frustrate a lot of these people, a lot of the people that supported President Trump. You're going to frustrate them because they're going to say they don't care about us. They made all these promises, and now they're saying it's Biden's fault. Some of these people who voted for Trump, they said the reason why they voted for Trump is because it was, because Biden did these things. And you said you were going to fix them. That's the reason why they voted for Trump. But if nothing's being done, if nothing's changing, then guess what? They're going to be upset, and they're going to want to vote some of these different people, these different Congress people that are in office right now that support Trump. They're going to want to vote them out, because remember, this midterm election is going to be a referendum on the president. So I want to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe for more. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye. So that's all we have for this video. Make sure if you guys want to send me an email, you can do that, david@thetecshow.com. Like the video, subscribe for more, and check out these videos over here for some more great content. Talk to you later. Bye.